another extension was agreed at the European Council summit to prevent a no-deal outcome on April 12th. Of course, now the big question is what purpose this extension is going to serve. And I am not convinced that it's actually going to help the UK reach a decision. I think for the EU, the main purpose of the extension was to avoid any blame for a no-deal outcome, and also to give the UK time, enough time to let the political processes play out. But beyond that, there's really the question of whether removing or easing the time pressure is going to help the UK reach a decision. There are several possible routes through which the UK could possibly reach a decision. The first one could be a second referendum, which Prime Minister Theresa May remains opposed to, and Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn is at least very, very skeptical about, and supports only very reluctantly under huge pressure from his party. So given both leaders' reluctance, it looks quite unlikely that this is going to go ahead, not least because the indicative vote process in the UK Parliament has shown that there's actually not a majority for this option in Parliament. The second route through which a decision could be reached would be a general election. However, again, that might be fairly unlikely because the Conservatives have very little to gain in a general election if they have to basically campaign without having delivered their promise of leaving the EU. Similarly, some smaller parties have very little to gain. The Northern Irish Democratic Unionist Party would probably lose its key role in currently propping up Theresa May's minority government, and therefore they would lose a lot of leverage, and the newly formed party Change UK might very well be wiped out. So it looks like most MPs don't have an incentive to vote for an early election, which again makes this outcome quite unlikely in the coming 6 months. Another possible decision would be a compromise between Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn. But again, it is quite unlikely that the cross-party talks are going to lead anywhere because there are three quite big sticking points that could present problems. First, there is the question of the customs union. It is Labour's position that the UK should remain in a customs union with the EU after Brexit. However, Theresa May is still opposed to that. And not least because membership of a customs union would basically make it much more difficult for the UK to have its own independent trade policy. And this idea that the UK could become a big trading power and have its independent trade policy is really the last remaining potential economic benefit of Brexit. So to basically give that away, even though of course it's questionable as to what extent the UK actually would succeed in having would have a very successful trade policy. But still, to give that away would be quite a big step for a lot of Brexiteers in the Conservative Party. The second sticking point would be a second referendum. Jeremy Corbyn is quite skeptical about it, but many in his party have said that they would only support a deal if there was another vote. And the last sticking point would be a sort of mechanism to bind future governments, because what Labour is really worried about is that Corbyn and Theresa May now agree a compromise. Based on that, they ask the EU to change the political declaration. The EU says yes, and then Theresa May stands down, and a Brexiteer, someone like Boris Johnson, takes over power, rips up the political declaration, and Labour has still supported the withdrawal agreement, but is now basically left with an outcome that it doesn't consider desirable. So Labour's concern really is that finding a mechanism to prevent that is really difficult. So it would have to trust that Theresa May is still going to be in power for the next phase of the negotiations, but that again looks very unlikely. So this issue of the lack of trust is another potential sticking point. And those two issues make it quite, I think, make it quite unlikely that May and Corbyn are going to find a compromise. And for those reasons, because it's very much possible that we're not going to get a conclusion, and that means that at the end of October, when the next extension runs out, we might be in the same position as now, with no decision and pressure on the EU to give the UK another extension. And the EU has already signaled that it is willing to go quite far to avoid a no-deal outcome. So it is very much possible that it will grant the UK another extension. And yet what the EU really wants to avoid is a circle of one extension after the other that continues to divert attention from other pressing issues and where Brexit continues to consume most of the EU's time and energy.